Good afternoon and welcome to the Falcon Oil Gas Limited Investor Update. Throughout this recorded update, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and could be submitted anytime via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your questions and press send. If you could please hold off submitting your questions until Philip has addressed the pre-submitted questions, just to avoid duplication, that would be most appreciated. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll. And Philip, if we may just get straight into the questions, the first one here reads as follows. What is the deal that was announced on the 30th of September 2025?
Thanks, Lily, and welcome everybody. Good morning to some and afternoon to others. The deal we announced on the 30th of September was Tamboran Resources, our JV partner in the Beetaloo, are going to acquire all of Falcon's subsidiaries. And this is a deal which is a combination of mostly shares and a small bit of cash. The total number of shares that Tamboran is going to be issuing for this transaction is 6.537 million shares, and then the cash element is 23.7 million.
That's great. Just turning to the next question. So will I be receiving cash and Tamboran shares for my shareholding in Falcon?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of confusion when people saw a cash amount. There was going to be an element of cash and shares, but no. I mean, every shareholder, bar one, will only receive Tamboran shares. The cash element of 23.7 million, that's a cash element for one single shareholder, a sanctioned shareholder. But no, every other shareholder will just be receiving Tamboran shares.
Perfect. So how many Tamboran shares will I be receiving for my Falcon shares?
Yeah, so at the time when we negotiated the deal with Tamboran back in through August into September, we looked at the relative values of each company. We agreed the exchange ratio between the two based on our relative values back then of 0.00687 Tamboran shares for every Falcon share you have. So if you're a shareholder with, let's say, 100,000 Falcon shares, you will receive 687 Tamboran shares.
Perfect, thank you. Is this a good deal for Falcon shareholders?
Absolutely. Your board wouldn't have recommended this if it didn't believe it was a really good deal. But let me maybe explain, a couple of reasons why. At the time of announcing the transaction, our share price, it was up high or higher than our previous at 18 Canadian cents, roughly about 10 pence. But if you go back, the previous month, 2 months, so you look at the VWAP, the volume weighted average price over the last 20 days, it was close to like 14, 15 cents. So that put a value of Falcon of, around about 160 million Canadian. When we negotiated the deal and the exchange ratio of this 0.00687, that implied an offer price from Tamboran of 21.54 Canadian cent. And that at the time we agreed that deal increased the value of Falcon up to 240 million Canadian dollars in value. Our share price today is now 25 cents. And that reflects, I believe, the market's appreciation of this deal. And that further increases the value of Falcon, the overall value of Falcon, up to about 280 million. Then if you look at, for example, Tamboran's current share price, which is what you're going to be receiving, is Tamboran shares. And their share price today, I think, is around about $28.5. You take the conversion ratio of 0.00687, and that equates to, 27, 28 cents per Falcon share, and thereby looking at a value increase of up to $300 million for Falcon. So that's the value side of things. But the other reason, I guess, it's worth mentioning as to why we believe this is a great deal. Your board and management, we really believe in the Beetaloo. Our strategy was always to find a way to extract as much value from the Beetaloo by sticking with this project for as long as possible. And maybe until such time as developments with regard to production, farm out partner deals were better recognized by the market and therefore then reflected in your company's share price. What this deal has done, because it's a share for share deal with Tamboran, whose only other asset is the Beetaloo, this allows Falcon shareholders to continue their participation in the Beetaloo. And, we'll hopefully all of us enjoy a future enormous potential over the next few years. For example, if I came to you last September with, the value then of 160 million, and I said, hey, we got a great deal. Somebody wants to buy the company for $300 million in cash, not shares, in cash. We would have struggled to recommend that deal to the shareholders, even though that would have been a significant uplift in value. What this deal has done for Falcon shareholders, we've already now captured the near-term upside since we've announced the deal. The valuation increasing from 160 to 300 million. But better still, Falcon shareholders, assuming you stay with your Tamboran shares, you'll own shares in a bigger, a more liquid company whose only asset is the same asset we're selling. And on top of that, you're going to own shares in a company that now is, and has been the operator in the Beetaloo. So you're basically getting your cake and eating it, and in fact, you're going to have a cherry on top of that cake by staying with Tamboran for the foreseeable, as they manage their way through the farm outs and going into production and so on.
That's great. And a similar question here: is this a good deal for Tamboran shareholders?
Well, I guess that's a question for Tamboran shareholders to answer. They've got their meeting coming up in early March. I know, and it's stated in their press release, I know the board of Tamboran, they've fully recommended the deal because they clearly believe this is a good deal for Tamboran. What it does for them in the near term for Tamboran, clearly it gives them a greater interest in the block they're looking to farm out, because they're going to increase their interest in that block from 58% to 81%. This will allow them to execute a better farm out deal. And that's not just to the benefit of Tamboran. That's now going to be also to the benefit of Falcon, because we're going to get, our shares in Tamboran will be, will increase in value once they execute this better farm out deal. So it's one of the real reasons I believe that Tamboran wanted to do this deal with us, was they could actually, maximize out on a much better deal in terms of farming out this block. Longer term, when you look at Tamboran, they now own 22.5% interest in these blocks that were created as part of the checkerboarding process, where Daly Waters owns the remaining 77.5%. So this, increases Tamboran's exposure to the entire Beetaloo. So they got kind of a good upside from doing the deal in the short term and then again in the long term. So yeah, I mean, it's for their shareholders to decide, but yeah, definitely I believe this is a very good deal for Tamboran shareholders.
Perfect, thank you. Do you see further near-term increase in the value of the enlarged Tamboran share price post this deal?
Yeah, look, there's been a good increase from back in September. They announced a big financing package the same day as they announced the merger. There's been a lot of activity going on. If anybody tuned into the webinar yesterday with the new CEO on board, there's a lot of stuff going on, fracking, drilling, going into production. On the operation side of things, they are advancing towards commercial production. We fracked one well at the end of last year. They'll be fracking 3 more wells in Q2 this year. And Tamboran will be selling Beetaloo gas, commercial gas, by the end of the second half of 2026. I believe this will change everyone's view on the Beetaloo as it moves from exploration play to a production development. The market certainly has not yet valued the Beetaloo as a production play. So there's enormous upside in the value of Tamboran just in the short to medium term alone. And then, of course, there's the farm out process that's currently ongoing that Tamboran talk about a lot. They've been actively working on a farm out deal. Who knows? Maybe they're getting closer. I think the question was posed to them at the meeting yesterday, because they talk about Q1 or is it Q2, but they say everything is on track. And just to be clear, I have no knowledge whatsoever on their farm out process other than what's publicly stated and what they said last night in terms of any deal or the timing of any deal or who the partners might be. But I'm pretty hopeful that a deal will be announced before the end of June, maybe even sooner. And if this is the case, I think this will be a transformative effect on the value of Tamboran. And then, of course, there's also a chance that Daly Waters, the other joint venture player in the Beetaloo, they might also be looking at farm out opportunities. When you have a JV partner, engaging in a farm out process on a play as big as this, there's a strong possibility that those looking to farm in will, contact other players to see what options might be available. For example, Falcon, I received a couple of such queries from major national oil companies last year. So I got a good feeling of how active the farm out process really is. The interest from the NOCs in Falcon, it was, unfortunately, it was limited, mainly due to the fact that we couldn't offer them operatorship. But that wouldn't be the case with Daly Waters. So maybe we could see more than one farm out in 2026. And again, just to be absolutely clear, I have no knowledge whatsoever of Daly Waters' intentions even regarding any farm out or whether they're in a process to farm out. This is pure speculation on my part.
Perfect. Just turning to the next question. Why do this deal now, and why not wait until after the Beetaloo goes into production and Tamboran has done a farm out?
Yeah, that's a good question in that, well, it's a question I get asked quite a bit. But I think, people who ask that question, I think, fail to understand that this is a share for share exchange. Maybe they fail to understand that this is not a selling out of a company, it's a merger. Maybe they don't fully understand that there is no cash in this that will crystallize the value back at 160 million back at September. This deal is, the shareholders in Falcon, you're getting shares in Tamboran. a company that has a larger interest in the same asset and is also the operator. By agreeing this deal in September, as I said earlier, we've already captured all of the increase in the value of the Beetaloo, reflected in Tamboran's increased share price since we announced the deal. And that's translated into a near doubling of Falcon's share price. Should Tamboran execute a farm out post a merger, it's very likely that Tamboran's share price will increase significantly. What this merger does, it ensures that Falcon shareholders are going to benefit from such increase. Had we not done the deal, had we sat on the sidelines, we might get some increase, but now we're going to capture all the current uplift in Tamboran, but we're going to capture any future uplift in Tamboran by being a Tamboran shareholder. And then you look at when the Beetaloo goes into production by the end of the year. A Beetaloo production driven by Tamboran being the operator, we wouldn't have had a huge amount in that production. Being a Tamboran shareholder, Falcon shareholders would benefit significantly from this. So, like I said, Tamboran share price $28.50, exchange ratio of 0.00687, 28 cents. And we have not seen that share price today. We certainly wouldn't be at 28 cents or 25 cents today had we decided to hold out for another year.
That's great. You negotiated one of the best deals ever for Falcon back in October 2022, which allowed Falcon to go non-consent on each drill spacing unit, which meant that Falcon could choose just to stay in the Beetaloo at 22.5% and pay nothing and just lose out on a few acres when these DSUs were created. Why sell now rather than just sticking with this strategy of sitting on the sidelines, let your JV partners pay for everything and then sell in 3 to 5 years' time?
Yeah, great question, in fairness. And, firstly, thanks for recognizing what I think is one of the best deals we ever negotiated for Falcon. But despite being such a good deal and having this option of going non-consent, which we have exercised, we went from 22.5% down to 5% initially. We went from 5% down to 0% more recently. But you've got to bear in mind, there's a lot of other general Beetaloo costs that we would still be on the hook to pay 22.5% of. So even at 0% during this current, drilling fracking phase, there are a lot of additional costs. If I can give you an example, since we announced the deal in September last up to now, we've had cash calls of close to $2 million. And that's despite going non-consent on the current drilling program. Fortunately, one of the terms of the deal we negotiated with Tamboran back in September, as part of this merger, that they would pay for all our cash calls from that date up until closing. So despite the fact there's $2 million called on us, we haven't had to pay that. But sitting on the sidelines, sitting with our hands in our pockets, we don't really get to keep our hands in our pockets. We would have been writing checks for, as I said, $2 million for the last several months. And more importantly, of course, there was the APA pipeline, where Falcon, were we want to participate in this pipeline, up to our 22.5%, we'd have to pay our share of the collateral to APA to build the pipeline, to take the gas from the Beetaloo to the Northern Territory. And I think that total collateral required by APA was in the order of 50 million. So our share would have been something around about 10 million. We could, of course, have gone 0 consent in the pipeline. But what would that mean? We wouldn't be able to participate in future DSUs around the pilot area or drill production wells in DSUs even where we already have an interest, because if we did, we'd have no place to put the gas. So I hope shareholders appreciate that by agreeing this deal back in September, we not only captured the increase in the value of our operating partner, Tamboran, but more importantly, we've avoided the need to continuously go back to the market to raise more money, something that would have always put downward pressure on Falcon's share price. And yet what we've seen is a huge increase in the Falcon share price over the last 4, 5, and 6 months.
That's great. Are there any tax implications on this share-for-share exchange?
Well, first of all, I'm not a tax expert. And secondly, I guess it depends on where you are tax resident. For example, the rules in Ireland, and I think the same probably apply to the UK, where there's a full share-for-share exchange, as is the case here. And regardless of the jurisdiction of the companies merging, there is no deemed disposal for CGT purposes. But again, you need to seek your own tax advice on that. I don't believe the situation in Canada or USA is the same. I think if a Canadian company was acquiring Falcon, which is also, by the way, a Canadian company, there would be no deemed disposal because both companies are of the same jurisdiction. But since Tamboran is a US company, the rules in Canada are different, and revenue will regard this merger as a deemed disposal. So you may have a CGT to pay depending on the cost of your Falcon shares. But I strongly urge you to take your own tax advice wherever you live, whatever jurisdiction you're in. And it's also worth noting, and again, subject to getting your advice, but the price of the Tamboran shares being exchanged, I believe, from a tax perspective, on this deemed disposal, is the price of Tamboran shares at the time the deal was agreed between Falcon and Tamboran. So that price was $21.94, not the $28.50 today. But I urge anyone who's looking at this and looking at your holding and looking at your historic cost of carrying Falcon shares to take full tax advice as to what will be deemed. First of all, is it deemed a disposal? And two, then what is the relative price of that deemed disposal? Is it $21.94, which I believe it is? But I strongly urge you to take your own tax advice.
Thank you. What do I need to ensure my shares are voted?
Mostly it's quite straightforward. In fact, I just got mine through my online platform just prior to this meeting, about an hour prior to this meeting. If your shares are registered in your name, you will receive a form of proxy, which you'll just need to complete as per the instructions set out in the proxy form. In the more likely event that you're non-registered beneficial holder of Falcon shares, and typically your shares are registered in the name of your brokerage firm, your bank, trust company, or other intermediary, then if you don't hear from them, as will be the norm anyway, you should contact that intermediary and make sure they vote your shares in accordance with your instructions. You may have done this in the past when voting your shares at the company AGM. And the process here is absolutely no different whatsoever. And of course, I would encourage every shareholder to ensure your shares are voted in accordance with your instructions. And needless to say, I would encourage every shareholder to vote for this deal.
That's great. And the last question we've got here reads, I saw a filing on SEDAR which refers to a letter of transmittal and eligibility form. Can you explain what this document is and what I may have to do?
Yeah, this is a document. It's literally, again, it's only to be used for registered shareholders of Falcon. So not for any of you, and most of you will be non-registered beneficial holders of Falcon. So for the most part, non-registered shareholders, you just need to contact your brokerage firm or whatever intermediary firm you use who handle the exchange of Tamboran shares, and just make sure that that form is completed and the letter is submitted to Computershare, so that the transfer of and the exchange of Tamboran shares for Falcon shares happens seamlessly in the background. And when you look at your account, whether it be online or whatever, you'll see your Tamboran shares arrive there post the deal and post the closing of this transaction.
Philip, thank you for answering those questions. Just before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which is particularly important to yourself and the company, could I please just ask you for a few closing comments?
Yeah, look, I think this is my last IM meeting, and apart from the upcoming shareholder meeting, which will take place on the 11th of March, it's my last opportunity to address Falcon shareholders. So first of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my CFO, Anne Flynn, who's been with Falcon for over 10 years. Her commitment and work ethic at all times have been nothing short of brilliant. The closing of this transaction, the start, by the way, which coincided with Anne going on maternity leave, wouldn't have even been possible without her daily dedication to getting this job done. So we all owe her an enormous amount of gratitude. So thank you, Anne. And to you, the shareholders, thank you for your continued support over so many years. I've got to know a lot of you long surfing shareholders, some of you before I even joined this company back in 2012. One of the greatest aspects of my job over the past 14 years, and the bit I truly enjoy the most, was getting to know so many of you. Even as recently as this week, I had a call with a wonderful couple from Alberta, Canada, who have been significant shareholders in Falcon since 2009. So this is the part of the job that I'll definitely miss the most. And finally, to the many and well-informed bloggers on the bulletin boards, thank you for your support over the years. You've managed to keep shareholders very well informed by generously sharing your industry expertise and knowledge of the market. So thank you all very much.
Philip, thank you for updating investors today. Can I please ask investors not to close the session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Falcon Oil Gas Limited, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good afternoon to you all.